And so that's why we're getting the 3 minutes, and they're encouraging us.
And welcome to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Glad you're with us. We're here each week. We're talking to interesting people and talking about topical issues. And this week we have one of the most powerful people in state government.
Indeed, and frankly, for quite some time he has held that position, although it held a position of power, although it wasn't widely recognized as such perhaps by most people. Speaker of the House, Republican Chris Benge from Tulsa, will be with us. He took over just as the session began. It was an active session, a lot went on. He's got a lot to tell us about what he's proud of in that session and what we can look forward to in the future. I'm pleased he'd come over here from Tulsa to join us.
Absolutely, and he's been very involved in what goes on in Tulsa through the years, but I don't think a lot of people in our Oklahoma City market know all that much about the Speaker of the House, because he came in literally overnight and became sort of a household name in state politics, and here he is, and through, as you said, a fairly eventful session, and now we'll get his respects on how it went in 2008 and how he thinks it's going to go in 2009.
Yeah, he's been described by some who know him as kind of a quiet, powerful leader. And I think the transition that he made into the Speaker's position, at the, if you will, at the last minute before the session does show the kind of respect he has on both sides of the aisle.
Chris Benge, Speaker of the House, today's guest on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
In driving rain, blistering heat, and bitter cold, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, Chesapeake drills non-stop for natural gas on American soil. Chesapeake drills more new gas wells than anyone else, and from those wells collects the most drilling information and acquires more 3D seismic images, leveraging every efficiency to improve the odds of finding more natural gas every day with every well we drill. The better job we do of discovering bigger reserves of clean-burning American natural gas, the greater the prosperity of our nearby communities, our state, and our nation. And as long as there are more gas reserves to be found here in the U.S., we will never rest. Chesapeake. Natural gas wins the day.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Very pleased today to have the Honorable Chris Benge, the Speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, join us. We're pleased he'd drive the turnpike to come over and be with us. He was born and raised in southwest Tulsa, did his undergraduate work at Oklahoma State University, Tulsa. He was in private business for 17 years, has been in the Oklahoma legislature since 1998. The last 3 years prior to his election as Speaker of the House, he served as chairman of the House Appropriations and Budget Committee, where he drew high marks for his work on getting budgets together in the House. He was elected Speaker of the House this last session. This is his first, and we hope not his last, appearance on The Verdict. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here with you guys. Thanks.
Well, a belated congratulations on being named Speaker of the House. You were elected by acclamation. Very unusual, I would think, for a Speaker of the House to be elected unanimously. Any sense of historical perspective there, and what caused it?
I'm not sure if that's how often, if that's happened before. Haven't done the research on that, but I have to give a lot of credit to just the House overall, Republicans and Democrats. I think that the circumstances that we found ourselves in coming into session, needing to put a speaker in place on the very first day when it was uncertain as to who. Typically, when we go into a session, that's kind of pretty much predetermined. And in this case, of course, there was a lot of uncertainty as to who was going to take the role. And I think those circumstances, the House members stepped up and realized that we needed to get someone in place, and we needed to get about the people's business. And I think it was a good gesture on behalf of the Minority Leader, Representative Morgan, and his caucus that they wanted to go ahead and confirm me as Speaker. And then we were able to get focused on taking care of the people's business at that point.
Because it happened so quickly, was there more of a need for a consensus builder at the time when the decision had to be made, and when you came in and became Speaker? Well,
I think there was a need for just some continuity and stability, and I think that those are the things that I try to focus on. I think my personality kind of reflects that, and it certainly was needed, and we were able to address it quickly, and again, everyone was able to focus on legislation and what we needed to do to get the session underway.
Well, for those of us who are kind of on the outside looking in as just citizens, it seems to me that sent a strong message to people like me and other citizens that the House was prepared to work in a bipartisan way to try to get the most done for Oklahoma. And where that hasn't always been the case, either in the House or the Senate for that matter, but it certainly seemed to be the starting message that was sent by your selection. Let me ask you about the job. How did you, since you've done it now for one session, how did you find the job? Was it harder or easier than you thought?
It was as hard as I thought it would be. I mean, I was not under any illusions that it would be an easy job. It was hard, very challenging. You're dealing with a lot of different issues, a lot of different personalities. I've always looked at this may be a simple analogy, but I use this a lot when I talk to school groups, children in the classroom. Is that the Capitol is it's a microcosm of the state. You have 3.5 million people in the state. If you were to try to put 3.5 million people in a room together, you could never get anything accomplished. But and it's almost that difficult having 101 members of a House in the House that come together and try to come to some consensus to move the state forward. So it's very challenging. Been very challenging.
You kept all of the existing chairpersons in place. Why did you do that? And how did you arrive at that decision? There had to be at least one. You said, I'd really like to bump that person out of there, but you didn't.
Well, again, first of all, we had a very good team in place. I felt like we have some very, very qualified and talented members that are serving as committee chairman and in leadership positions, and I didn't see that there would be that it would benefit us to change that. And again, wanting to seek some continuity and stability at a time whenever there was some uncertainty as to where we were going to go as a House, where we were going to go as a Republican caucus. I felt like that we needed to keep those members in place and to have that continuity. And I think it was a good move. I mean, I think it helped us move on into session and take up the issues that were at hand.
Looking forward, how many different chair people do you think you would have in place by next year?
It's premature to say at this point. We'll have to see. First of all, we have about at least a half a dozen members who are retiring, and so we'll have we're going to have a new caucus, a new House, really for that matter, come November, and we'll just have to see how that plays out before we make any kind of decisions on who would be committee chairs in the next session.
I guess there was one committee that had to be filled, and that was the House Appropriations and Budget Committee, the one you were chairing. I presume you didn't wear both hats during the session.
Yeah, that's correct. That would have.
Who'd you appoint?
I appointed Representative Ken Miller from Edmond, and Representative Miller was serving as the vice chairman at the time, and he had spent a year serving in that capacity, and he and I had worked closely together on the budget from last year. And I felt like that he was, I had the experience and was very qualified. He's an economist. He teaches economics at ECU or OCU in Edmond, and so very qualified. And he did an extremely tremendous job in taking on that role.
One thing that came up that I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention it, the Representative Kern's comments dealing with the homosexuality issue. Was that a distraction for you in the session, and is that pretty well concluded now?
It was not a distraction. I mean, we were able to continue on, and I know that there was a lot of media focused on that, and certainly grabbed a lot of media attention. But we just kept on with our work. We knew that we had to focus on the legislation that we had before us and trying to get a budget out this year, which we placed as our first priority, was to get a budget accomplished, and we actually did early on in session, and which really, I think, facilitated a smooth session the rest of the way.
I think this year's budget seemed to be fairly close to projections. Mm-hmm. Looking ahead to next year's session, what sort of budget projections is the House looking at?
It's the projections that we're working on off of right now, of course, were made in February, and that is for the upcoming fiscal year beginning July 1. And it is it's basically we were calling it a standstill. It's pretty close to the amount that we spent in fiscal year 08. Actually a little bit less. We're projected to spend less money than we did in fiscal year 08. So, but slightly less, and so it's going to be pretty much standstill. We were able to pass. Again, the budget early on, and to keep the vital functions of government.
Now, when you talk about the bond issue, is that spending that takes place in this year's budget, or are those expenses that it will be incurred in future budgets?
It will begin with fiscal year 09. Those commitments to addressing the bond issue that was passed late in session will begin in fiscal year 09 and continue for the next 15 years.
Now. Let's focus on one aspect of that. I think I'm correct that there was $100 million earmarked for endowments, higher education endowments. With the contributions we're seeing coming in both by our friend Burns Hargis, bringing in Boone Pickens and others at Oklahoma State University, and of course David Bourne doing a lot of the same at OU, under the program of kind of a matching fund. Is that going to put a strain on the legislature to keep up with those endowment commitments?
Well, there's been a backlog for the last few years. We've not been able to keep up with those commitments, and you want to appreciate and follow through with commitments from people in the private sector who have really stepped up to put millions of dollars in the higher ed system. So what we've done is we've taken a first step to try to address that backlog. The backlog, as it stands currently, is approximately $225 million. The bond issue that we passed toward the end of session would address $100 million of that, and then at some point in the future, we will want to try to address the balance.
That's a good problem to have.
That's exactly what my words were going to be. When you got the private sector that involved in education, that's a really good sign for Oklahoma.
I think it is a good sign. They're stepping up and realizing how important higher ed is to the state.
We're visiting with the Speaker of the House, Chris Benge, and we'll be right back with more on the verdict.
Home values are down in some states, but not in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's home values have increased 4.2% during the past 12 months. Unlike some states where home values have decreased as much as 20%. Good thing you're in Oklahoma. There may be real estate problems in some states, but there has never been a better time than now to buy or sell a home in Oklahoma. One of the most affordable states in the country, Oklahomans are buying and selling homes every day, and an Oklahoma Realtor can show you how. Good thing you're in Oklahoma.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a plug nickel. Oh yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up, want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers with our guest Speaker of the House, Chris Benge. We have completed the 2008 legislative session. What would you say are the major accomplishments of this year?
Well, as I alluded to it earlier, I think getting the budget finished early was a major accomplishment. Nationwide, probably half the states are looking at budget cuts and looking at really serious revenue downturns. Mm-hmm. We were looking at again, kind of a standstill, slowing growth, but pretty much standstill budget. And for us to be able to come, especially in an election year, whenever we had the, of course, change in leadership in the House early on, the Senate being split, 24 apiece, Democrat and Republican, there were a lot of dynamics that were in the Capitol that could have created a real difficulty in getting a budget passed. Mm-hmm. And but we were able to get it finished and get it finished in April. And you know, we talk about a lot of things at the Capitol, but we have to get a budget out. I mean, if we do nothing else, right, we have to pass a budget by the time we're finished in May. So I think that was a great accomplishment.
I would assume that the leadership of both parties has a list of priorities when the session begins, what they hope to accomplish that session. How successful were the Republicans, and how successful do you think the Democrats deemed themselves to be?
I can certainly speak for from our perspective. We were very successful in putting together a road plan. Beginning 3 years ago, we made road infrastructure very much a priority from the House Republican caucus. Roads had been neglected for many decades. In fact, the transportation budget was pretty much flat and had even declined in some respect the previous 20 years. So we began in 2005, began really focusing on roads, passed another bill in 2007, and then this session we passed a bond issue of $300 million that will address the 8-year plan, the transportation plan that ODOT puts into place to try to address our most significant road needs and bridge needs around the state. I think that was a huge accomplishment because we feel like that is a very vital function. People see it, feel it every day when they drive our highways. Our guests, people from out of state, see it. And so it was I think a great accomplishment for us to get that passed. When you look at transportation needs in the future, and I think levels of expectation are largely based on what people see in adjoining states. Mm-hmm. And it's my perception, I don't know this to be true, but I'm pretty sure it is, that the gasoline taxes in the neighboring states are a little higher. We saw what happened when Oklahomans go to the ballots to vote on gasoline taxes, and certainly in today's environment, you would be silly to even come forward and say that people want to pay more for gasoline. Nonetheless, the cost of building roads just keeps going up. People's expectations remains high. How do you look long term and say that Oklahoma is going to keep up with the transportation dollars necessary based on the expectations of the voters and the citizens? Well, and you made a great observation. I mean, the people very resoundingly said they didn't want to see the gasoline tax increased, and of course, many of us were not supportive, realized that it would not pass on the ballot. I think what that told us is that we've got to find the money within our existing budget, and we've been able to do that. Long term, and this is part of the rationale, or this is the rationale for going the bond issue route. We wanted to put a large amount of money into roads and bridges very quickly. ODOT, again, works off of an 8-year plan. We would like to see that 8-year plan put into effect in fewer years, 4 or 5 years, so that we can achieve the savings and efficiencies that you create by avoiding those inflationary costs that are built into road maintenance or road building. We've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, inflation has run about 11 or 12% in concrete and steel. And of course, a lot of that's being driven by global demand around with China and India. And their economy is growing so much and doing so much building. That has affected the costs of building roads and bridges here in the state. So what we wanted to do and this gets to your question about long term, is try to front load a lot of those expenses so that we can get the roads and bridges built sooner rather than later. And in the long term, we'll save millions of dollars on construction costs by doing it that way.
If you looked into the future, the turnpike situation, we're going to have more turnpike miles in the future. It's hard to imagine we'd have less because transportation dollars are so hard to secure. Do you see an increase in the number of turnpike roads in the turnpike miles in the state?
I certainly don't see it anytime in the near future. The turnpikes they basically are maxed out as far as the credit line goes. I think there's about $2 billion in debt on the turnpike system now that they're addressing, and so I don't see any new turnpikes anytime soon.
Well, the House and Senate did save the citizens some money by adjourning a week early before they actually had to by law. You've been in the House 10 years approximately, I guess.
Correct.
Has that happened before? Is that kind of a unique experience?
I think that we have. I think I can remember getting out maybe a day early, maybe 2 days early, but never a week early.
I have pictures in my mind of them covering up the clock so that nobody'd know what time it was, and that's sort of.
I've heard those stories before. The one thing about this session that was kind of unique is we had from the first Monday in February to the last Friday in May, which is the time period that we have to be finished. It was a 17-week block, and the typical session lasts 16 weeks. So we in essence, we finished about the same time that we would in previous sessions. And but anytime we can conclude, we do save the taxpayers a lot of dollars.
Well, let me ask you to, if you name names if you want or don't if you want, but who gets principal, in your view, principal credit for passing that budget early on both sides of the aisle?
Well, I think, of course, the leaders, the Appropriations and Budget Chairman work directly on getting that budget through, and then our subcommittee chairman also. We have a budget team that works on the budget, and it's made up of, again, the A and B chairman, and then we have different subcommittee chairmen that work in their respective areas, such as healthcare and roads and schools and things like that. And so I think you have to give credit to the budget team members for all of their diligent work on getting the budget passed.
I think there's a perception from some people that when the session ends, the legislators are off the rest of the year until February. I know better. I know there are a lot of things that go on in between sessions. But I would think for the Speaker, this is pretty much a 12-month-a-year type deal. I mean, there's not a week goes by where you can't be focused on something. So what are the priorities of the Speaker's office looking ahead for February of '09?
Well, we right now we have during the interim we call them interim studies, and it is topics of interest that the members request that they may want to pursue legislation for, and so we will be right now in this period we're looking at those requests, or we'll be looking at those requests and approving the different studies that the legislators want to take on during the interim. And that's important. That's an important part of the legislative process.
Which ones catch your eye? Which ones would you think will receive the highest profile?
I think we'll probably be looking at some healthcare related requests, and keep in mind I haven't seen the full list yet. That's still being compiled. There are usually tax relief type requests and studies that are ongoing.
How they would impact the state.
Exactly, tax reform type measures, healthcare, education always gets a lot of attention. Many members in the legislature are very interested about improving our education system, and so you'll see those types of things, and probably some related to public safety also, especially corrections.
I guess we didn't get out of this session a lawsuit reform bill, or at least not one that was widely talked about. Were you disappointed at that?
That was a disappointment not to be able to pass some lawsuit reform, and of course the bill that was. We did pass a version of it this year. Again, it was vetoed by the governor. That's the second year in a row that the governor has vetoed some lawsuit reform measure, and we're gonna see it as a big priority again next year. We're going to come back and try to push that through because we think that's important, very important for the business climate in the state to get a handle on lawsuit reform.
The perception is that the Senate, which was deadlocked with 24 Republicans and 24 Democrats, will swing to the Republican side after the November elections, and that the Republicans would remain in control of the House. Any reason to believe that that's not the scenario that's going to occur?
It's looking very, very favorable right now, and of course, there's so many things that can go on in an election cycle that could possibly change that. You know, who knows? But I think that the Senate Republicans have a lot of momentum right now. The two open seats that they're one open seat they're focusing on, and one that they believe they can take back, which was Senator Riley, who switched parties a couple of years ago. They're looking favorable to be able to take the majority. And then in the House, we have a 13-seat cushion, and we're looking to build on our majority and think we have a very good opportunity to do that, considering the national climate, having probably a very liberal Democrat on the ticket in either Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, we think helps us, and so we're expecting to expand on our majority. We have some open seats also that we'll be able to go after.
Speaker, this was your first trip in on the verdict. Hope it's not the last. We enjoyed visiting with you.
Yeah, please come back.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, Speaker of the House Chris Benge, our guest today on the verdict. Kent and I'll have a final word after this.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of the verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to the verdict. Chris Benge is an impressive individual.
He is indeed. The House obviously has recognized that in years past by virtue of his past service and elected him by acclamation, and as you pointed out, kind of an unheard of thing. And he and the House members performed admirably this year.
Website to get more information about Chris and what he does, okhouse.gov. Our website, theverdict.tv. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.